Pull something warm around you tonight. Maybe a blanket, maybe a cup of something hot. Because tonight we are not going to a coliseum. We are not going to the Senate floor, or a battlefield, or a marble temple gleaming on a hilltop. We are going somewhere much quieter than that. We are going to bed. A bed in ancient Rome. An ordinary bed, in an ordinary home, on an ordinary night, somewhere around the year 100 AD. And I want to warn you gently before we begin. What you are about to find there will surprise you. Because the way those people fell asleep, what they feared in the dark, what they hoped for, what they whispered before their eyes closed, it is nothing like what the history books ever thought to mention. And it is everything. Stay with me. There is an hour that has been almost completely erased from modern life. Not a dramatic hour, not the hour of sunrise or the hour of the first meal, or the hour when the forum filled with noise and argument and the smell of fresh bread from the street stalls. A quieter hour than any of those. The Romans called it la hora noctis prima, the first hour of the night, and it began the moment the sun touched the horizon. In a city like Rome, a city of perhaps 1 million people, the largest the Western world had ever seen, the first hour of night was not the beginning of evening entertainment. It was not the hour you poured the wine and settled in. For most people, for the vast majority of ordinary Romans who were not senators or merchants or wealthy patrons, the first hour of night was the hour everything became dangerous. Because Rome at night was not the Rome you have seen in films. The streets of ancient Rome after dark had no lights. No torches lining the roads, no lanterns hung at intersections. The city that had built aqueducts across entire continents, that had engineered roads stretching from Scotland to Syria, had not solved the problem of illuminating a street after dark. The wealthy carried slaves ahead of them with torches when they went out at night. Everyone else stayed home. The Roman writer Juvenal, who had a gift for making misery sound almost entertaining, described the nighttime streets of Rome with barely contained horror. Roof tiles fell from upper windows onto pedestrians below. Drunken men picked fights that ended badly. The criminal class, he wrote, treated the nighttime city as their private territory. The law, in fact, encoded this reality. Roman law permitted the killing of a thief caught at night, not at day, specifically at night, because the assumption was that darkness made identification impossible and danger immediate. The night was not a romantic backdrop. It was a legal category. A different set of rules applied to it. So when does the ordinary Roman family, our family, the one we are going to spend this evening with, when do they close the door? Earlier than you think.
Let me take you inside. The home of a middling Roman family, not wealthy, not destitute, somewhere in the comfortable middle of that vast city, was called a domus. And the first thing you would notice, stepping through the door in the last gray light of evening, is the atrium. A central room open to the sky above, with a shallow rectangular pool called the impluvium set into the floor to catch rainwater. The sky visible directly from inside the house. The stars, when they came, visible from the very center of where you lived. This was not incidental. The Roman house was designed to breathe, to let light in during the day and to let the cooling air of night move through it. The walls were thick. The floors were stone or mosaic, still holding the warmth of the day hours after the sun had gone. In wealthy homes, the floors were heated from below by channels of warm air, a system called hypocist, one of the genuine engineering marvels of the ancient world. In ordinary homes, the warmth came from the cooking fire, from bodies, from the thick wool of sleeping blankets. The smell of the Roman evening was distinct. Garlic and olive oil from the kitchen, the faint mineral coolness of the impluvium water, burning tallow from the oil lamps, small clay vessels with a wick floating in olive oil, producing a flame about the size of your thumbnail, and smelling, if you have ever stood near a cooking fire, exactly like that. Not unpleasant, just present. Now, our family. A husband who works in a trade, a carpenter, let us say, or a fuller who processes cloth. A wife who manages the household. 2 children, a boy of 10 and a girl of 7. Perhaps a single household slave, which even modest Roman families often kept, who sleeps in a small room near the kitchen. This is not a grand home. The rooms are perhaps 4 or 5 in total, but it is solid, it is theirs, and tonight, as the light fails, it is being prepared for the night. The wife is doing something that a Roman housewife did every single evening without exception, something so ordinary that no Roman writer thought to describe it in detail, which means we have had to reconstruct it from other evidence. She is tending the lares. Every Roman home had a shrine, not the grand marble kind, not the temples you see in paintings. A small niche built into the wall, often near the hearth or just inside the entrance, containing small terracotta or bronze figurines, the lares familiares, the household gods. These were not distant deities, not Jupiter thundering from some remote Olympian palace. The lares were intimate. They were the spirits of the family's ancestors, specifically understood to be watching over this house, this family, these particular people. Every evening, before the household settled to sleep, an offering was made. A small piece of food, a bit of bread, a little salt cake called a mola salsa, a pour of wine onto the small altar flame. Not as performance, not as religion in the formal sense we might understand it today, as acknowledgement, as the daily practice of saying, "We are still here. We are grateful. Watch over us tonight." The historian Cato the Elder, writing in the 2nd century BC, noted that it was the duty of the pater familiaris, the head of the household, to observe these rites carefully. Not because the gods needed the food, but because the act of offering oriented the family. It marked the boundary between day and night. It was, in our language, a ritual of transition. And transitions mattered enormously to the Romans, because the night they were transitioning into was not empty. It was full. Here is something that I think genuinely unsettles modern people when they first encounter it. Educated, sophisticated, philosophically serious Romans, people who had read Plato, who debated Stoic ethics, who had built the most advanced legal system the ancient world had ever produced, genuinely believed that the night was populated. Not metaphorically, not as cultural shorthand. They believed that specific entities moved through the darkness that did not move through daylight. And the most feared of these were the Lemures. The Lemures were the restless dead. Specifically, and this distinction mattered, they were the spirits of people who had died badly, violently, without proper burial, without the rites that would have settled them peacefully into the underworld. These spirits, it was believed, returned at night to haunt the homes of their descendants. They arrived hungry. They arrived angry. They had unfinished business with the living world. The Romans feared them seriously enough to have a 3-day festival in May, the Lemuria, entirely devoted to driving them away. On those nights, the head of the household would rise at midnight, wash his hands 3 times, and walk barefoot through the house, casting black beans over his shoulder. 9 times he would say the words, "I send these, with these beans I redeem me and mine," without looking back. And 9 times the gathered spirits were believed to gather up the beans and depart. Ovid, who recorded this rite with the slightly bemused tone of a man who has seen too much of human nature to dismiss anything entirely, noted that the rest of the family made as much noise as possible during the ceremony, banging pots, clattering bronze, to drive away whatever had not taken the beans. Think about that for a moment. In the same civilization that gave us the pantheon and the concept of jurisprudence, midnight, bare feet, black beans, clattering pots. The Roman night was not rational. It was not meant to be. But I want to step back from the supernatural for a moment, because there is something happening to the Roman body at night that is, in some ways, even more surprising than the Lemures. The Romans did not sleep the way we sleep. I want to be precise about this because sleep researchers and historians have only recently begun to understand it. For most of human history, and this includes ancient Rome and Greece, the normal pattern of sleep was not one solid block of 7 or 8 hours. It was 2 blocks, separated by an hour or more of quiet wakefulness in the middle of the night. The Romans even had words for this: Prima somnus, the first sleep; secunda somnus, the second sleep. These were not poetic expressions, they were descriptive. The first sleep typically began around dusk or shortly after, when the body, having worked since before dawn, was genuinely exhausted. It lasted perhaps 4 hours. Then came the waking interval, and then the second sleep, which carried the household through until morning. What did people do in that middle-of-the-night waking? The evidence is scattered but consistent. They prayed. They thought. They talked softly with whoever was beside them. The physician Galen, writing in the 2nd century A.D., recommended this waking interval for reflection and for the kind of quiet thinking that the busy day did not permit. The poet Horace wrote of lying awake in the dark hours, turning over a problem in his mind, not as insomnia, not as suffering, but simply as the natural texture of a night. We have lost this. The industrial age, with its need for synchronized labor schedules, gradually compressed sleep into a single mandatory block. And we now call any waking in the middle of the night anxiety or insomnia or something to be fixed. But for the Romans and for the Greeks before them, the dark middle hours were simply ours, yours, given back to you by the night.
And now, I want to take you briefly to Greece, because the Greeks had an understanding of nighttime that adds something essential to this picture. The Greeks believed the dreams were not random. They were not the meaningless static of a resting brain. They were communications from the gods, from the dead, from the deeper self that the noise of waking life buried too deep to hear. Hypnos, the god of sleep, was the gentle twin brother of Thanatos, the god of death. They lived together at the edge of the underworld, where the river Lethe, the river of forgetting, ran past. Sleep was the nightly rehearsal of death, the temporary departure of the soul from the body. And dreams, in this understanding, were what happened during that departure. The Greeks had entire sanctuaries, asclepeia, where the sick would come to sleep, not to be treated in the medical sense, to dream. They would undergo a period of ritual purification, fasting, bathing, prayer. They would lie down on the sacred floor of the temple, and they would wait for the god Asclepius to appear in their dreams and tell them what was wrong with them and how to heal it. This was not fringe practice. It was the mainstream medicine of the ancient Greek world, running in parallel with the rational medicine of Hippocrates, the observation-based, symptom-recording medicine that eventually became our own. Both streams existed simultaneously. The Greeks were entirely comfortable holding both. You could believe that dreams carried divine messages and that willow bark reduced fever. These were not in contradiction. What this means for the ordinary Greek family going to sleep at night, and for the Roman family who had inherited so much of Greek thought, is that the act of lying down was weighted differently than it is for us. You were not just resting. You were opening. You were making yourself available to something. The unconscious hours were not lost hours. They were the hours when the membrane between the human world and whatever lay beneath it grew thin.
Come back inside the Roman house now. The evening prayers are done. The children have been settled. And here I want to spend a moment with the light, because the light of a Roman night was something so specific, so particular, that once you understand it, it changes the whole texture of what I have been describing. The Roman oil lamp. A small terracotta or bronze vessel, often no bigger than your palm, filled with olive oil and fitted with a wick of twisted linen. In a prosperous home, there might be several of these. In a modest home, one or two. The light they produced was warm, golden, moving, alive, in the way that only flame is alive. It cast shadows that shifted with every breath of air. It illuminated the center of a room and let the edges dissolve. But olive oil was not cheap. A family that burned lamps generously through the long winter evenings was spending real money on light. The Roman word lucubrare, to work by lamplight, entered the language as a word for serious, devoted intellectual effort, precisely because burning a lamp to work by after dark was understood as a sacrifice, an expenditure of something genuinely valuable. When we say someone has lucubrated over a problem, we are using a word that once meant they burned their oil for this. They cared enough to spend the dark. And when the lamp was finally extinguished, blown out with one breath, the thin thread of smoke rising in the dark, the Roman house became genuinely, completely black. Not the city glow dark of a modern bedroom with its curtains drawn. Not the dim gray of a cloudy night. True dark, the kind that pressed against your eyes like something physical. The children knew this dark. They had grown up in it. And the fears that lived in it were not vague. They were named. The Strix was a creature of the Roman night, a bird witch that flew in darkness and stole the vitality of sleeping children. The Mormelis and the Lamia were names Greek mothers used to quiet children who wouldn't sleep. Not kindly in our modern parenting sense, but practically. There are things in the dark. You should sleep. This is protection, not threat. And somehow, inside all of that, the named fears, the restless dead, the gods in the corner, the children slept. Now, I have to tell you something about the Roman bed that will feel at first like a small detail and will turn out to be anything but. The Roman bed, the lectus, was not a private space in the way we understand privacy today. Sleeping alone was not the default. It was not even particularly desirable. The great bed of a wealthy household was wide enough for several people. Children slept alongside parents. Slaves in many households slept in the same room as the family they served, not in the bed, but on pallets nearby, close enough to hear and be heard. This was not considered strange. It was considered safe. The night was long and uncertain, and being alone in it was the condition you tried to avoid. The philosopher Pliny the Younger, whose letters survive in extraordinary detail, described lying awake at night in his country villa, listening to the sounds of the house around him, the breathing of the household, the distant sound of the sea, the particular silence that followed rain. He wrote about these hours not as interruptions, but as gifts. The night, he suggested, had a quality of attention that the day refused to offer. There is something in that observation I want to sit with for a moment. We have, in the last century or so, built our sleeping lives around maximum separation. Each person in their own room, each room insulated from the sounds of the others. White noise machines to block out what little ambient sound remains. And we have gained real things from this: privacy, autonomy, the luxury of individuated rest. I do not want to romanticize the alternative. But Pliny was not wrong that something is available in the nighttime sound of other people that the sealed-off, silent room does not offer. The sound of someone else breathing in the dark is, at some very old level of the human nervous system, the sound of safety. You are not alone. The night is not empty. Someone else is here with you inside it.
Before I let you go tonight, I want to take you back to that Roman family one final time. The lamp has been extinguished. The children are in their beds, or rather, in their places in the shared sleeping room, because the notion of each child having their own room would have struck our Roman family as both extraordinarily wasteful and faintly sad. Who would want to sleep alone? The house is dark. Outside, Rome is doing what Rome always does at night. Somewhere a fire has started in the upper story of an insula, an apartment block, and men are running with water. Somewhere a drunk is singing badly. The nighttime food sellers, who had their own economy, their own routes, their own regular customers who came out only after dark, are calling their wares in voices just loud enough to carry one street over. Inside, breathing, the settling of warm stone, the faint smell of olive oil with a lamp has just gone out, the impluvium pool catching a little starlight through the open roof. And the father of the household, before he closes his eyes, says something. Not out loud, or not entirely. The Romans had a practice of prayer that was often half internal, moving the lips but keeping the words private between the self and whoever was listening. He addresses the lares one more time. He names the members of his household, as a Roman prayer required. You named the people you were praying for, specifically, so the gods would know who you meant. His wife, his children, the slave in the back room who had been with the family since before the children were born. He asks for their safety through the hours he cannot control. Then he lies down. The second sleep is still hours away. Before it comes, there will be the dark interval of wakefulness, lying still in the black room, thinking about the debt that is due next month, the noise the cart right next door makes starting at dawn, the dream he had 3 nights ago that he still cannot quite interpret, the old questions, the questions that every quiet night in every century has handed back to whoever is awake enough to receive them. Who are the people in your house? Are they safe? Have you done enough today to deserve tomorrow? The Romans asked these questions too, in the dark,
in the lampless rooms, in the long middle hours between first sleep and second sleep. They were not so different from you. They were frightened of things that moved in the dark and things that moved in the light, both. They made offerings to the gods, because the gods were the only ones available at 2 in the morning when a child was feverish or a sound came from the wrong direction. They reached for the people beside them in the dark, because the night was long, and the lamplight did not last forever, and a warm body beside you was the oldest form of reassurance the human species has ever found.
I think about that sometimes. About the Roman family in their dark house, the lamp gone out, the Lemures standing quiet in their niche, the stars showing through the open roof of the atrium. About all the centuries between that night and this one, and how many of the same questions have been carried through all of them. The same fears, the same love, the same instinct to name the people who matter before you let yourself sleep. The world they lived in was harder than ours in almost every way that counts. The dark was darker. The fears were more immediate. The medicine was worse, and the night offered no safety net. And yet, there is a word the Romans used for the state they sought at night, quies. It means quiet, but it means more than that. It means a settled stillness, not the absence of noise, the presence of peace. Quies was what you were aiming for when the lamp went out. Not just sleep, but a specific quality of rest that came from having done what was required, offered what was owed, said what needed to be said to the gods and the people in your house. I wonder sometimes if quies is what we are reaching for too, when we finally put down the phone, when the last notification goes silent, when we lie in the dark and just listen to the room, the sound of breathing nearby, the house settling, the night doing what the night does. Maybe that is the oldest ritual of all, older than the Lemures, older than the bean throwing at midnight, older than Hypnos and Thanatos sleeping side by side at the edge of the underworld. Just lying down in the dark and being grateful for the warmth beside you, and hoping, quietly, privately, in whatever language your heart uses for this, that everyone in your house wakes up tomorrow. Sleep well tonight. The first sleep is waiting for you. If this kind of storytelling found you somewhere quiet tonight, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. And if you want to follow this family further, into their mornings, their meals, their marketplaces, and their medicine, the next part of this story is already waiting.